I've accidentally accumulated 92 books across all the series I'm currently in the middle of. 92. And every time I think about starting a new series now, a tiny voice in my head is like, girl, absolutely not. So I finally did the thing I've been avoiding. I went through my entire spreadsheet to figure out exactly how bad the situation is. And apparently it's so bad that we're making this a 3-part series. So welcome to part 1 of every book series I'm currently in the middle of, where we're starting with the books that I'm currently waiting for. The sequels that technically aren't out yet. And there may be some that I just haven't gotten to where we're waiting on the 3rd book, but we will deal with those as they come up. So I'm going to tell you what these series are about, where I'm currently in each one, and what I thought of the books I've already read. Most importantly, which ones I think are worth starting if you haven't read them, because I'm going to be trapped in series purgatory. I'm taking one of you down with me. So let's get into part 1. First is the Beautiful and Beastly series, where I'm currently waiting for A Storm of Dragons and Sorcery in 2027. The first book is a loose Beauty and the Beast retelling following Rain Stone, a woman who has this beast inside of her that she's basically spent her entire life afraid of. And then there's Remy, our extremely secretive, extremely powerful, very possessive warden, who has a tendency to give Rain approximately 3% of the information she actually needs at any given time. Naturally, I love them together. I gave the first book 4 stars. One of my favorite things about Rain was that her strength wasn't written as her just becoming this hard, emotionless badass. She's kind, she's generous, she's a little naive, but there's this really quiet strength underneath all of that, and it becomes incredibly important in the way she learns to coexist with the beast. And the world itself was so much fun because we're technically on Earth, but there are portals into these magical realms filled with dragons, monsters, fae, and all kinds of fantasy creatures. Now, A Storm of Dragons and Sorcery is apparently bringing us a resurrection stone that could potentially raise ancient gods and dead rulers. Also, we're getting a fae prince named Lou, who knows suspiciously too much about Rain's beast. And we're apparently putting Rain between him and Remy. So we're adding magical warfare and a potential love triangle to the situation. Cool. Very healthy. I will see everyone in 2027. Then we have the Divided Fate series. I read To Cage a Wild Bird and gave it 4.5 stars, and now I'm waiting for To Unleash a Darker Fate. And if you've been around me for any amount of time, you probably know the dystopian books are one of my major weaknesses. This one gave me some of the feelings I got when I read the Prison Healer trilogy, except with a much more adult science fiction dystopian edge. We're in this society called Davidium, which with massive disparities between its different levels, and our main character, Raven, ends up imprisoned in Endlock. And then we have Vale, prison guard, prisoner, sneaking around. We all know where this is going to be going. The relationships dynamics, though, were one of my favorite things about the first book. But I also really love this social commentary. There's a lot of suffering built into this society, and the book doesn't shy away from showing who gets protected by the system and who gets crushed underneath it. So, spoiler alert for the end of book 1, Raven has escaped the prison, but obviously escaping was not the finish line. Book 2 has her crossing the waste with the other survivors, being hunted by the Davidium, and getting pulled into this revolutionary organization called the Collective. So we're going from prison break dystopian romance into rebellion, and that is exactly the direction I wanted this series to go. So I am very, very ready for book 2. Next is the Immortal Desires duology, and this one hurts because A Vow of Vengeance was a 5-star read for me. The final book is called A Deal in Death, and this world has one of my favorite recent fantasy magic systems because the entire thing revolves around tarot magic. Different cards create different powers, hierarchies, and dynamics between the characters, and somehow the magic system manages to feel complex without feeling confusing. I was invested basically immediately. We follow Rune Riker and Prince Draven, and the first book just keeps throwing revelation after revelation at you. Every time you think you understand what's happening, nope. Here's another twist. Here's another secret. Here's something else that's going to completely change what you thought you knew. And then the ending. I'm not going to spoil it, but saying that this book ends on a cliffhanger feels almost disrespectfully understated. Now we're heading into the finale with Rune and Draven preparing to take on the Immortal Realms and the Seraph King, except Rune receives a prophecy warning her that the future she wants with Draven could come at a horrific cost. So naturally, we're adding love versus destiny to a situation that was already going pretty well. I need answers and can't wait to see what this sequel is in 2027. Queen of Faces was also 5 stars for me, and I'm waiting for its sequel, King of Masks. The basic premise of this world is wild. The wealthy can essentially swap bodies like they're changing clothes. Meanwhile, our main character, Annabelle Gage, is trapped in this male body that's literally going to die within a year. Her best chance of surviving is getting into this elite magic school where rich students are given new bodies, except she can't pass the entrance exam. So after trying to steal a body herself, she gets caught and is offered another option: become an assassin. Already, I was in. But what really surprised me was how much I became invested in these characters and the politics of this world. There's a really strong queer focus. There's class commentary. There's rage directed at an absolutely rotten ruling elite. And there's this fascinating question underneath the whole story about identity when bodies themselves have effectively become commodities. Now, King of Masks is putting Anna and Nell on opposite sides of a war. We've got old horrors returning. We've got Krakens. We've got divided loyalties. We've got Anna trying to rescue people she loves, while Nell, though, is being pulled back toward her father and the ruling system. There are approximately 17 ways this can emotionally destroy me, and I cannot wait. Now, we need a palate cleanser from all this fantasy trauma, so let's go to cozy mystery. The Stockingham and Pike mysteries were one of my favorite surprises of 2026. I gave Murder at World's End 4.75 stars, and book 2 is The Shadows of Kensington Gore. The first book takes place in 1910 on this remote English island where everyone is waiting for Halley's Comet and potentially the end of the world. The apocalypse doesn't happen, but a murder does. And because the tides cut the island off from the mainland, we've actually got ourselves a locked room style mystery. But the reason I fell for this series was our detective duo. Decimus Stockingham is brilliant, unconventional, and socially, let's call it selective. Stephen Pike is her much more human assistant. If you love the Holmes and Watson dynamic, this series needs to be on your TBR. The second book moves us into London in 1911 amid coronation fever and suffragette unrest, with a murdered policeman, 3 women fleeing the scene, an entire invisible network made up of maids throughout London. This sounds delightful. So mystery readers, especially my Agatha Christie people, put this series on your TBR. Okay, We Who Will Die was 4.7 stars for me, and I need We Who Will Rise immediately. This is one of those romantasy books where the romance is obviously doing its job, but I was just as invested in figuring out the actual plot. There are vampires, gods, an emperor's arena, political power plays, ancient mythology, and mysteries that keep unfolding throughout the entire book. And because the world draws heavily from ancient Greek and Roman influences, you already had me. But then the plot twist started, and there just kept coming and coming and coming. The romance was also exactly my preferred kind of steamy because it wasn't necessarily about throwing spice on every other page. There was tension and yearning. Book 2 has Arvel forced into an alliance with both vampire brothers, Tiernan and Rorik, while they're trying to stop this god of ruin from essentially destroying everything. And I specifically need more from Rorik. I am hoping that this is his book to really come into his own because there's already so much potential sitting there. This was already on my mental top shelf of romantasy series after book 1, and I can't wait for book 2. Okay, so this one technically no longer belongs entirely in the I can't read it category because I just got an arc of Silver Dawn. Whoops! The first book, Red City by Marie Lu, was 4.5 stars for me. The easiest elevator pitch is basically The Godfather meets magicians with shades of Romeo and Juliet and Mistborn. Alchemy exists, but it's intertwined with criminal organizations, power, money, immigration, belonging, and this very cutthroat version of ambition. Sam and Ari are both navigating this world that they've been shaped by from childhood. And one of the things I loved most was the way Marie Lu explored belonging. Like, who gets to belong? What does assimilation cost? And what happens when you've essentially become groomed into a very specific system of power? It's dark. It's definitely not cozy. And the magic has this really interesting scientific foundation underneath it. Now, Silver Dawn picks up after the collapse of Grand Central and takes us to Europe, where Belle Epoque has developed a new Philosopher's Stone formula that could completely reshape alchemy. And Sam and Ari are getting pulled directly back into everything, except this time I have the book. So I can't blame Marie Lu anymore. This is now sitting in my house, looking at me from the shelf, and so hopefully I'll get to it soon. Next is Seasons of Carnage, where I'm caught up and waiting for book 3. The upcoming book is called Hunting Season. And if you want your romance sweet and healthy and full of excellent communication, this is not where I would send you. This is dark romance. We're dealing with Harper and Nolan, a second chance romance between two people who have accumulated a lot of damage. Book 3 has Harper hunting Nolan after her entire world has fallen apart, only to realize the situation isn't nearly as straightforward as she believes. We're getting enemies to lovers, second chance, grumpy versus grumpy, forced proximity, and then touch him or her and die energy. So basically, subtly has left the building. I read through book 2. I'm now invested in the series. I just need book 3. Then we have Daggermouth. I gave this one 4.5 stars. And if you've read that ending, then you already know why Python is on this list. I'm so excited for book 2. Without getting into spoiler territory, Daggermouth is one of those books where the ending significantly raised my investment in continuing this series. You know, when you're enjoying a book, everything is going well, and then the author drops something into the final stretch that makes you go, oh, ho, ho, ho. Well, now I need the next one immediately. And that's where I'm at with this series. Lost in Space deserves more than a quick mention because this book was just delightful. I had an incredible time reading a cozy sci-fi where Moss just isn't sentient. The Moss actually gets a POV. We follow Torian, who's desperate to save her sister and buys the cheapest spaceship she can find. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, the ship already has an occupant, a sentient patch of moss with abandonment issues. Torian and Moss have this dry, slightly unhinged dynamic that immediately worked for me, and Moss occasionally gave me Murderbot vibes. But underneath the silliness, this is really a lovely story about lonely people finding each other. We've got found family, grief, belonging, anxiety, danger, and just enough stakes that it never becomes too saccharine for me. That balance is exactly what I want from cozy science fiction. Sentient moss, found family, questionable spaceship. What more do you need? I love this one and will absolutely be there for book 2. Okay, here's where we take a hard turn. Eden is an indie post-apocalyptical horror novel, and the apocalypse is fungus. A new species of fungus has spread across the planet and infects mammals, hijacking their brains and essentially turning them into violent predators. 6 years later, civilization has collapsed. Humanity is scattered into makeshift settlements, and as tends to happen in post-apocalyptic fiction, the monsters are not necessarily the worst thing you have to worry about. We follow Jackson Green after his camp is destroyed and his daughter is kidnapped by a government faction known as the Ash Guard. So he has to cross what remains of Wyoming to get her back. Fungal apocalypse plus infected animals plus violent remnants of humanity. This is extremely my kind of post-apocalyptic horror. I've read book 1. Now I'm waiting for Eden, book 2. Shrouded Queen was a really interesting reading experience for me because this book has 2 major POVs and I basically had 2 different relationships with them. One did not work for me. The other, obsessed. So obviously I'm continuing this series. This is a romantic duology inspired by ancient Egyptian mythology where a slave and a princess essentially switch places during an attack. Samira is captured after being used as the princess's decoy and has to impersonate her while surviving trials designed to awaken divine powers. Meanwhile, Amunet, the actual princess, now queen, is on the run and trying to reach her father, who is the god of the underworld, as one does. And then we have shapeshifters, specifically bear shifters. You know I'm going to see where this goes. I'm very curious whether book 2 can make me equally invested in both sides of the story, because if it does, this could end incredibly strong. Next is the Verran Isle series. I gave Air of Illusion 4.5 stars. This is a fantasy built around magic, deception, and this constant uncertainty about whether appearances can actually be trusted. And the biggest win for me was pacing. I flew through it. I also genuinely did not predict the ending, and at this point, with the amount of fantasy I read, surprising me is getting increasingly difficult. But perhaps the greatest achievement of all, the FMC didn't annoy me. Do you understand how much that is worth? I wasn't yelling at her decisions. I wasn't wondering where she suddenly lost all common sense for the sake of advancing the plot. I actually enjoyed following her. Good pacing, enjoyable characters, a reveal I didn't see coming. Sometimes this is exactly what I want from a fantasy book. Okay, this one, Seek the Traitor's Son, was technically a 5-star book for me, except emotionally it was more like 6 stars. This is futuristic dystopian Earth with 2 warring nations and a prophecy that could potentially determine the outcome of the conflict. And Veronica Roth absolutely made me suffer. The story is beautiful and bleak and full of survival and tension and yearning. There are so many moving pieces that I genuinely recommend keeping notes while you read it, or really use the map. This is not the fantasy where I would recommend wandering in after 6 months and expecting yourself to remember everything. And if you're an audiobook person, I really, really love the audio. It has 4 narrators, including Amani Jade Powers, Max Myers, and Rebecca Solar. And this is one of those productions where the performances really added to the scale of the story. The sequel is Curse the Left Hand, coming in 2027, and I will absolutely be rereading book 1 before then. The Castle Knoll Murder Mystery Series is another case where I'm actually doing very well. I've read 3 books. Please clap. And book 3 was actually my favorite so far at 4.5 stars. The series follows mysteries that connect present-day Annie Adams to the journals and history of her great-aunt Frances. In book 3, we get this really fun dual timeline mystery moving between 1960s London and the present. Frances is living in Soho and gets pulled into the glamorous orbit of Vera Huntington. Meanwhile, present-day Annie finds the body of her mother's protege with her heart surgically removed, only to discover Frances wrote about a murder decades earlier that looks almost the exact same. This series really scratches that historical meets modern mystery itch for me, and at this point, I'm invested in these characters beyond just whatever individual murder happens in each book. There's no book 4 yet, so once again, I have done the work. Now, Bloodbound was 4.5 stars for me, and the final quarter of this book read like someone feverishly shouting plot twist at me while I tried to keep up, and I mean that very lovingly. This is the first book in the Cursed Covenant trilogy, and if you are suffering from romantasy fatigue because everything is starting to feel like copy-paste, this one did not feel predictable to me. We've got dragons, familiars, witches, rivals to lovers, multiple magic systems, and more importantly, the friendship and relationship between the women really drive this story. The romance is there, but it isn't the entire engine. Then the book ends with something that came so far out of left field that I basically just sat there trying to process what I had read. And now I'm supposed to wait for book 2. Rude. Burn the Sea was one of those books that made me immediately want to start Googling the actual history behind it. This is historical fantasy centered on Abaca, who was thrown into this impossible position where she has to lead, strategize, survive war, and navigate motherhood all at once. And then you reach the author's note and discover that this story is a fantastical reimagining of a real woman. That completely changed the way I thought about this book. I couldn't believe that I had never heard of her. So if you want woman-led historical fantasy that actually makes you want to learn more about the history underneath it, this is the one I'd recommend. Abaca was absolutely the heart of this for me, and I need the sequel. Then we have the Ice Plague Wars. I am invested in this series. The first 2 books, Symbiote and Sentient, have been so much fun. We're in Antarctica, there's a murderous evolving microbe. Everything that could possibly go wrong at a remote research station is shockingly going wrong. By the second book, survivors from the South Pole are being taken to McMurdo Station, except the organism has apparently beaten them there, which feels unfair. Then on top of the actual biological horror, there are political machines surrounding the entire rescue. This series is fast, tense, increasingly horrific, and very much in that Michael Crichton, James Rowland's techno-thriller lane. I've read the first 2 books. Now I'm waiting patiently for book 3. Both books in the Dark Inheritance series have been 5 stars for me. Both. And I'm surprised I actually don't see this series absolutely everywhere. Book 2, The Wicked and the Damned, took what I already liked and made everything darker and more complicated. The characters are really the reason that this series has been working for me. The relationships feel layered, the emotional conflicts matter just as much as the external danger, and the twists didn't feel like they just existed to shock you. They actually changed how I understood the characters and the story. There are still unresolved threads, though, going all the way back to the first book. And normally that frustrates me, but here it makes the trilogy feel very intentional. Like Rebecca Robinson is setting up something much larger, and we're not supposed to understand the entire shape of it yet, which means book 3 has an enormous job. But after 2 5-star books, I trust her. Also, this series is criminally underrated. Then we have the Prince of Sin series, and I have been reading Carrie Maniscalco for a long time. This is one of those interconnected fantasy romance series where every book focuses on a different Prince of Sin. Book 3 gives us Sloth, who would really prefer to stay inside his enchanted library and avoid everybody. relatable king. Unfortunately, an ancient deity is threatening the underworld and he gets dragged into a hunt for the Book of Nightmares. Then there's Lore, a librarian who quite literally gets sucked into a book and finds herself traveling through increasingly twisted versions of her favorite stories with Sloth. So we've got magical books, an enchanted library, gods, portals, and a grumpy magical prince who does not want to leave his house. Again, relatable. We don't really know everything about book 4 yet. I've been with Carrie Maniscalco for a long time, so obviously I'll be continuing this series. Then we have Chloe Gong's Dystopian Strangeloom trilogy, where humanity has increasingly retreated into virtual reality as the physical world deteriorates. I gave book 1, Cold Wire, 4.5 stars. And now here's an update to the spreadsheet. Book 2, Deadlock, is actually coming later in 2026. So we're not waiting until some distant theoretical future. This book is happening. The sequel has Leah working as a double agent from inside of Knoll Corp, while Nick is increasingly frustrated with the coalition's unwillingness to act. We've got corporate power, rebellion, surveillance, virtual reality, and deteriorating trust. All of my favorite dystopian ingredients. And after the way Cold Wire ended, yeah, this book is high on my list. The Last Legacy series is another one where my readings are moving in exactly the direction you want a series to go. Book 1, 4.5 stars. Book 2, 5 stars. And now there's absolutely no news about book 3. Excellent. Thank you. What I love about this series is that Lucan isn't some unstoppable warrior who's going to solve every problem by hitting it harder. He's clever, he's charming, he's resourceful. He survives because he can think his way out of situations. If you're a Lies of Locke Lamora person, that's the comparison that immediately comes to mind for me when I think about this book. But book 2 really elevates the character relationships. Lucan, Asher, and Flea become the emotional center of this series for me. We get more of Asher's history and begin to understand why she and Lucan connect the way they do. And Flea is precious. She brings that little spark of innocence and humor into a story that desperately needs it. There are pseudo-dragons, fantastic action sequences, complicated family histories, and this continuing mystery around Lucan's father. I am hooked. There's no book 3 announcement yet, so I'm kind of in limbo with this series. Then we have Alchemy of Secrets. I went into this with pretty low expectations because fantasy adjacent books can be very hit or miss for me. And then I tore through it. Stephanie Garber's world building was easily the strongest part. It felt strange and fresh and constantly made me want to understand one more piece of how everything worked. There's this persistent uncertainty around the characters where you don't really know who is trustworthy or even necessarily who's good. Normally that can become frustrating. Here it worked for me because our main character doesn't know either. So you're disoriented with her. There's no substantial news on book 2 yet, so there's another one where I'm simply just sitting here waiting. Oh, Crowns of Nyaxia. Book 5 just came out. I gave it 5 stars, and now I have to wait for the entire series finale. How? I don't want to spoil anything because if you're 5 books into a series, we're well beyond casual synopsis territory. But I will say this. Kyrene and Septimus are now some of my favorite Carissa Broadbent characters. This one is for the unhinged women supporters, the cocky EMC enthusiasts, the slow burn people, the people who apparently enjoy watching their favorite characters experience zero peace for 500 pages. This book was dark, atmospheric, sexy, smart, incredibly fast-paced, and exactly the kind of book I needed to revive my romantasy brain. I came out of it basically yelling Carissa at my ceiling. And now we have 1 book left. I need the finale, but I also don't want this universe to end. It's a very terrible place to be. And now we arrive at one where my defense begins to crumble because I gave Arcana Academy 5 stars. Book 2, Prince of Swords, is out, and I have not read it. There's no reason. I don't have an excuse. I just haven't gotten to it yet. And this is another tarot-based magic world, this time following Clara Greysword. And book 2 brings us back to Arcana Academy, with Clara now one of the most wanted people in the world. We've got Prince Kalis, Forbidden Desire, tarot magic, secrets, all the things I clearly want. And yet I keep looking at the book and going, soon. So here's my problem. Book 3 isn't out yet. So a tiny part of my brain is whispering, but what if we just wait? Because then I could read books 2 and 3 together, and future Brittany wouldn't have to remember the details for 18 months. Is this reasonable planning or procrastination? You decide. And I'm having the exact same problem with Stacey McEwen's Artisan trilogy. Book 2 is out. Book 3 isn't. And I'm starting to think that maybe I just want to wait and binge both. The world blends high-class magic with this really gritty class and labor conflict that's reminiscent of Peaky Blinders. Artisans and craftsmen are at war, and Patrick and Nina, our two main characters, are caught right in the middle of it. We've got rebellion, class warfare, magic, betrayal, and old relationships resurfacing. We also have a romance where loyalty is constantly being tested against much their political stakes. Book 2 is right there, available, ready for me, and apparently I'm choosing to stare at it until Book 3 exists. This is becoming a pattern, but one that I'm not necessarily mad about. Now we have the Invoker trilogy. I actually have a slightly better excuse for this one because the Invoker books are thick. Book 2, A Dance of Burning Blades, just came out. And Book 1 was the first time since Rebecca Roanhorse's Between Earth and Sky that I felt completely transported into an epic fantasy world that I wanted to physically explore. This world feels like Final Fantasy if everyone were melanated. We've got Magitech, summons, ancestor magic, warring clans, monsters, massive battles, and multiple POVs where I was actually interested in all of them. Jinno was my favorite. His relationship with his power and his family history made his arc incredibly compelling. And then that ending completely transformed where I thought this series was going. Book 2 is now sitting on my shelf. It's enormous. I know I'm going to love being back in this world. I just need to mentally pack a bag before I go. The Wicked game series has been so much fun. I liked Phantasma, but Book 2, I liked it way more. The female main character completely won me over. At first, I thought she might drive me insane, but then suddenly she became this funny, impulsive, distractible chaos gremlin. And I was like, actually, this is my girl. Book 3 is Daemonica, and the setup sounds equally unhinged. A woman is trying to escape her controlling fiance, and apparently the only route out involves getting into this exclusive club called Demonica, except there's one available spot. And a man from her past wants it too. So naturally, they have to compete in a deadly scavenger hunt. Normal dating behavior. Books 1 and 2 were both so much fun, and I'm absolutely continuing the series and reading Book 3. The Shattered Land series is another one where we actually have a sequel coming very soon. Book 1 is The Outcast Mage, and I thought this was a really solid beginning to an epic new fantasy series. If you're someone who wants to try adult epic fantasy but gets intimidated by the gigantic lore dumps and prose when you need a dictionary every 6 pages, this might actually be a great entry point for you. There are multiple POVs, political conflicts, magic, and dragon riders, and hints of a world that feel much larger than what we've actually seen so far. I did have some issues. Some of the POV voices initially blended together, and there was a little too much secret keeping for the sake of secret keeping for me. But the pacing was fantastic. I read the entire thing in basically a day. Book 2 is called The Void Dragon, coming later in 2026. And it looks like we're going to be going much deeper into Nyla's powers, the Dragon Riders, and the larger political instability. Exactly what I wanted from Book 1. Anathema was 5 stars for me. Well, actually, no. It was like infinity stars. God tier. Phenomenal. Maveth and Evander immediately shot up my FMC MMC rankings. The tension, the banter, the found family, the horrifying creatures. This is dark romantasy that actually felt dark. And yes, there are some familiar tropes in there. We got enemies to lovers, we get the resurrected or supposedly extinct bloodline situation. The execution worked so well for me that I did not care. The world is creepy, the magic is fascinating, the characters are morally questionable, and I genuinely couldn't predict where the story was going, which again is increasingly difficult to do for me. I have Book 2, but I haven't picked it up yet. And then there will eventually be a Book 3. So I'm absolutely staying with this series. And then we have Heavenbreaker. 5 stars. This was one of those books where I genuinely didn't know what I was walking into, and suddenly I was completely consumed. The basic idea is that you take knightly traditions and codes of honor and put them in a dystopian future in space with gigantic humanoid war machines. Yep. That's the book. We're following Sonali on this revenge mission through a society built around hierarchy and power. And the deeper you get, the more pieces of this larger puzzle start clicking into place. It's dark, it's gritty, there's political intrigue, there's revenge, and there's giant machinery. And it somehow manages to be science fiction without becoming so technical that you need an engineering degree to understand what anyone is doing. I would especially recommend this to people who like The Hunger Games or Neon Genesis Evangelion. And then I discovered that it's a duology, which means I'm now condemned to wait until 2027 for Hellrunner. We don't even have a synopsis yet, but I'm absolutely planning to reread Heavenbreaker before it comes out. And then we're ending part 1 with hierarchy, because this series perfectly demonstrates the 2 types of books I have on this list. One part, not my fault. The other part, extremely my fault. The Will of the Many was one of my favorite fantasy reads. This is James Islington's Roman-inspired epic fantasy following Vis, who's living under the hierarchy, a society where people literally surrender a portion of their will upward through a social system. And this wants nothing to do with it, which naturally means he eventually finds himself infiltrating one of the most prestigious academies in the entire society. You get an academy setting, political intrigue, competitions, mysteries, social hierarchy, secrets, and a protagonist who constantly feels like he's trying to think 12 moves ahead of everyone around him. That is my kind of fantasy. Now, book 2 exists. I need to read it. So the strength of the few, my fault. Hierarchy book 3 doesn't exist yet. That's the author's fault. We are sharing custody of this particular series problem. And that is the end of part 1. So subscribe if you want to watch me attempt to go through the rest of my series and part 2 and part 3. But before you go, I need you to enable me a little bit. Let me know in the comments which series from part 1 should everyone watching immediately add to their TBR, and which unreleased sequel are you currently waiting for? Tell me in the comments so we can all suffer together. I'll see you again in part 2.